Hello everyone, this is Caleb Simpson, and you're watching my walkthrough for Chrono Trigger for Nintendo DS. Towards the end of the game, there are side quests you can complete to get some awesome loot, and this particular video is going to be covering Marle's side quest, which is called the Rainbow Shell. So to begin with, you can do this optional step, which is to speak with Toma over in Chorus Village, over in the cafe/tavern, over here in the bottom right corner of the map, and you can find him here in 600 AD, but if you speak with him, he'll say that he has a clue about how to find the Rainbow Shell. Now, we did actually see this guy earlier in the poor village, Mayor's Manor, or whatever down there. I think it's called Elder's House, 600 AD, actually. But there was a dude there that was hiring Toma to go search for clues about the Rainbow Shell. So he says he has finally figured out some clues, and he says that he would like you to pour his spirits, otherwise known as soda in older versions of the game, over his tombstone if he is not successful, which is a really morbid request. Anyways, next you want to go ahead and hop back in the Epic and go to 1000 AD, and near the same location there is a tombstone that is over near the cape. So you want to head over here and then inspect it, and you will then witness this short conversation with Toma. Now, I know this is a weird place in the video to talk about this, but I have a lull where we're having this conversation with Toma. So, earlier in the walkthrough, I actually went back to Guardia Castle in 1000 AD with Marle and my party, and after the Magic Kingdom, you can go back there. As long as Marle's in your party, you can enter the castle. Now, that allows you to get a bunch of chests, so there's a bunch of elixirs and stuff like that. However, there's also a little, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a side quest, it's just a bunch of storyline and stuff, a bunch of dialogue between characters, but you can interact with the Chancellor and the King for some more like backstory, some more lore. So if you want to do that, then now is the time to do so, because after this you will not have access to that and you'll never see that again. Now, I covered that back in video 18 of the walkthrough, which is called Forward to the Past, so if you would like more details about that, you might want to stop this side quest and real quick go back and do those things, or just watch my video and you can see how to do all that stuff and just witness it there. But this will be your last opportunity to do so before that's no longer available. Now, before you leave, there is actually one hidden goodie we can grab real quick. There is a capsule that is hidden behind the tombstones. All you have to do is stand behind it, face towards the back of the tombstone, and then press A to select it, and you'll find a speed capsule/tab. Next, you want to have back in the Epic and go back to 600 AD, and the island that Toma was showing us in that little cinematic was right here. It's just to the top left of Chorus Village itself. Now, this cave system, there is a note as soon as you enter, written in Toma's hand, and it explains that there are holes everywhere that are maybe supposed to be jumped into, so this is a little clue on how we proceed. Now, as you go to the next room, you'll then see we are actually in the remains of Tyrano Lair, which is one of the dungeons that we found in 65 million BC. This is really cool. I think this is such a neat idea because they reused some of the mechanics from that dungeon. So if you remember some of the puzzles and some of the buttons you had to press back when we were doing that, then this would allow you to proceed through here a little bit nicer. Now, we are going through it a little bit backwards, and some of the rooms are very different because they have become a cave system instead. But such a cool idea. Like, I think they handled this really, really well. I'm really pleased with this whole level design. It's honestly not that complicated. Like, all they did is they just took a couple different rooms and then reused them, recycled them, and then everything else is completely different. Like, this room is completely different than the original as well. So it's just a really simple thing. Like, they didn't have to take all the elements. They just had to figure out their favorite ones that they really wanted to use, and everything else is just totally custom, which is great. I think that's such a good principle to be using for designing dungeons. It's like familiar, but also not like super heavy-handed or anything, and it feels different enough that it doesn't like feel like it was cheap or anything. It just feels really well done, and I just think it's very impressive. Now, you know how in the last dungeon I was saying you just want to use lightning attacks for everything? This dungeon's the exact opposite. You want to not use lightning attacks at all because it causes, for the Gigasaurs, otherwise known as Isotosaurs, those guys, it causes some pretty serious counterattacks that are awful. Everything else, it just absorbs them or heals them and stuff, so just basically just don't use anybody with lightning attacks. You can use Magus and stuff if you want to, but just don't use any lightning attacks. Likewise, you can use Chrono, but try to rely on his physical attacks. So you can use like Falcon Strike, for example, with Ayla to hit a bunch of enemies in a line. That would be really good. Otherwise, you can do like use Frenzy or something like that, but or even Fire Whirl's like kind of okay. It's just not the greatest anymore. Like, a lot of our other attacks can take them all out in one hit, so I'd rather just use full screen clear in general. So go ahead and open the chest after you defeated these enemies, and I wouldn't bother going over to the left. I'm just going to show it just so you can see it, mostly because I think it's cool. Like, we have Nizbel 2's room where we fought him back in Tyrano Lair. It's kind of cool. But this is all just a dead end. This is just a shortcut to get back to the main room is all of this is. So it's actually more for coming back to the entrance is all it's for. So the left side is totally pointless. You want to continue on towards the right when you're ready to proceed. Now, as far as the enemies in this dungeon, one thing to note, you can charm a lot of goodies off of them, but the Isotosaurs, and otherwise known as Gigasaurs, they also, or Isotosaurs, whatever, they have ruby armor that you can charm off them. And likewise, the boss for this dungeon, you can charm a red plate off of him, which is super good as well. So this is an alternative to doing Ayla's side quest. You can charm, or you can trade in to get a bunch of ruby armors if you do Ayla's side quest, which she's recommending you do, but you can also skip that and do this dungeon first and charm a bunch of ruby armors instead, as well as get an even better red plate for completing the boss. So that's another alternative to you can either grind enemies to get the materials to buy the ruby armors, or you can charm enemies here. So either way, you can get stuff. Whichever way you decide to do it, though, I'd recommend either doing Ayla's side quest and buying the ruby armor, or doing this side quest and getting ruby armor and red plate before you do Lucca's side quest. So I actually did that in an earlier video, but this would be an alternative to doing that order instead. It's those Mega Man feels, man. You know, you do stuff in a certain order and you make the next section easier. Like, it's a lot like that. Now, all the enemies in this dungeon can be charmed to get some pretty good items. These lizard dactyls will give you turbo ethers, otherwise known as hyper ethers, and they will completely restore your MP to 99, which is really great. That's a super good item, the best ether in the game. Although, elixirs do the same thing, and they also give you HP, and I got a whole bunch of those back in Genodome, so I actually have more of these than I really need. So, of all the enemies in here, I would say these are probably the least useful, and they're really annoying. They have this nasty counterattack that causes confusion. It's super a pain to deal with. You need some status immunity to deal with it, and I have Angel's Tiara on all these chicks right now, which is why I'm using them, because that has status immunity on it. So it just makes these chicks really good to counter these guys. So yeah, I would say of all the enemies in this dungeon, these are definitely the biggest pain in the butt, so I'd recommend you just murder them all and don't even bother with charming them. But if you do want to charm them, then I'd recommend using Lucca's Hypno Wave. It's probably the easiest way to counter them, so you don't have to deal with them much. And then just make sure you bring some status immunity, in particular for Lucca, because she's going to be the one putting them to sleep. So next we want some single target physical damage, so either Chrono, Robo, or Frog. Either one of those three would be what I'd recommend. So you might remember this room from Tyrano Lair. You can interact with the skull directly in order to make it open up. Open the chest nearby, the egg if you haven't done that yet. The middle button will give you a spark feed. You can use a shelter or save if you want, but the bottom right one will cause enemies to appear, and we actually want to do this. These enemies actually are kind of scary. They hurt pretty bad, but these fossil apes can be charmed to get mega elixirs, which is super valuable. It's one of the most valuable items in the entire game, so I highly, highly recommend you charm them. So what I'm doing, just to make this a little bit faster and guarantee that I'm taking care of it as soon as possible, is I'm using Ayla and Marle to do Twin Charm to just make sure that it's successful, so that I don't run the risk of it failing and then spending a lot of time in this combat, because it just hurts really bad. Now these guys do have a counterattack, which happens when you are too far away from them. So as a result, what I want to do is I want to use Robo's single target attack, which is Rapid Fist, Rapid Fire Fist, otherwise known as Uzi Punch. I'm trying to use that when they are far away from me, so that I don't cause their counterattack. Sort of what's funny about these guys, now most enemies, if you charm them, they don't have a drop anymore either. These guys will actually still give you a Lapis when defeated as well, even though we've already charmed a Mega Elixir off of them. But yeah, Mega Elixirs are only found in very specific chests, and they're charmed off of very specific enemies, all of which don't respawn. So these enemies, after you kill them, they're gone forever. So there's only a finite number of Mega Elixirs in the entire game, and it's the most valuable restoration item in the entire game. So, super good for the final boss. So I'd highly recommend you charm these guys while you still have the opportunity. So once you've taken care of them, you can go ahead and use a shelter here if you want, and save if you like, and then use the other button. This will cause the floor to fall away and become a hole that we can fall down. Now, if you remember earlier at the very beginning of this dungeon, there was a note left behind by Toma, and he said, maybe you're supposed to jump in those holes, which is unusual. Before, when we were in Tyrano Lair, if you fell in the holes, it was bad. It took you, backwards in the dungeon. But you'll notice we're starting at the end of the dungeon, so going, back towards the old entrance, is actually the correct direction to go. So, what we want to do is actually fall into this hole on purpose. Now, normally in the game, when you're here in Tyrano Lair, you're not able to do this. Like, if you tried to walk towards the hole, it wouldn't let you. But now, in this particular one, you can just run right over to it, and your characters will fall down into a room where there are some more enemies. First, you want to step on the left switch to open the nearby skull, and then go inside to find a strength capsule. Then you can return and step on the right switch to make the enemies appear, which we actually want to do. And these guys are totally optional, you don't have to face them. However, in particular, one of the things I think is kind of cool about them is they are very vulnerable to Hypno Waves. They can be nullified really easily. And when charmed, they will then give you an elixir. Now, elixirs are the exact same thing as the turbo/hyper ethers that we were getting off of the lizardactyls earlier. However, they also restore HP, so it's just a better item. So these enemies are easier, they give you a better item, and yeah, I don't know, they just you can take care of them really, really fast. It's not a big deal at all, and they just give you better loot. So it's just, I don't know. If you're gonna skip some of the enemies, I'd recommend you skip the lizardactyls, just destroy them. If you get in combat with them, just use a Antipode Bomb 3 or something like that and just destroy them. And then meanwhile, these guys, you can totally take the time to charm if you want. And like I say, you can charm in Genodome is overall, I think, the best place to get elixir, but this is easier for sure. It's just, there's only a finite number of these battles though, so it's not as guaranteed. Now you'll notice too in this recording, I switched to using Antipode Bomb 2 for a second, and that's because it's more than enough damage to kill these isotonics, otherwise known as leapers, but it only attacks in a small area. But because it's more than enough damage, it doesn't matter, so I can save some MP. So I just targeted the middle one and then killed them all. It just works exactly like a fire whirl. It's the same kind of idea. But yeah, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and charm and kill all the isotonics because they just give you really good loot. If you're going to avoid some enemies in this whole dungeon, I would recommend you just ignore or like destroy the lizardactyls immediately. Don't even bother charming with them because they're a pain. Now, when facing the fossil apes, though, I would highly recommend you charm them because mega elixirs are super valuable and super rare. So again, we're going to switch back to one of my physical damage dealers, so like Chrono or Robo or Frog. Now, something to know about Chrono, one of the weird nuances about him is his weapon. So right now I'm wearing the Swallow. I'm going to switch it out for the Suzaku. And the reason for this is because earlier I was using Chrono for magic damage, and magic damage is not affected by his weapon, so the speed on the Swallow was better. But meanwhile, the Suzaku will actually give him more physical damage, and that will increase the damage of his regular attacks as well as his techs. So it makes his physical techs do more damage. It's up to you, though. Like, part of the funny thing is if Chrono can use a hard-hitting enough attack where he can finish off somebody without needing the Suzaku, then the Swallow would be better because of that extra speed. Does that make sense? So, like, if you can do more than enough damage, the Swallow is better, but if you're not going to do more than enough damage, then the Suzaku is better. So it really just depends on what you're doing. I find some of those little nuances intriguing in this game in general that you can even decide that, but just generally speaking, focusing on speed and MP cost is like the way to go, because the higher tiered MP skills are just better. They do so much more damage that it's way more worthwhile. Because it's like, alternatively, you could use, say, Cyclone, for example, with Chrono, but it's just not worth it anymore. Like, the problem is that, like, a lot of our other higher tiered techs will just kill everything in one hit anyway. So, like, why would you use Cyclone and use it many times and take damage when you could instead just use Luminaire and kill everything? Now, in this dungeon, you wouldn't want to use Luminaire because everything absorbs light. But if you think about this too, for example, we have so many characters that we can swap out, so I could have, Magus or Luca, Magus using Dark Matter, I could have Luca using Flare, I could have Chrono using Luminaire, and I could have Robo using Electrocute/Shock, and then we're killing everything on the entire screen, no problem. And then that's it. And then meanwhile, we have like Frog and Ayla using some really hard-hitting single techs on single targets, and yeah, so you have both of them do that, then use up everybody's MP, and then by the, even if you don't have any gold studs on or whatever, you still have enough MP capacity with all of your party members combined that you can wipe out everything in an entire dungeon without ever needing to use any ethers at all. So once you've killed all the enemies in this room, and I highly recommend you get the mega elixirs from the fossil apes, but after that, go ahead and open the nearby chest to get a blue gemstone, which unlocks a triple tech that I'll be showing later on in this walkthrough. Now, in the next room, if you go to the north, there is actually a shortcut that leads back to the entrance, but it is a one-way path, so only take that if you're committed to going back to the entrance. Instead, if you go south, there is a chest hidden over to the left that has the Zodiac Cape. This is a pretty good chest piece that also gives you magic defense, and I actually think it's pretty darn good. Like I said, if you're fighting magic enemies, don't underestimate how powerful magic defense is. It's really, really good. Like, seriously, I don't know how to explain. You get to these thresholds where if you put on magic defense gear, like we have magic defense helmets, chest pieces, and the helmet is primarily like Tabin's helmet, for example, but we also have accessories that give us magic defense too, and you reach these thresholds where if you have enough magic defense, you take no damage at all. I don't know how to explain. Like, you go from taking like 300 damage to taking 100 damage to taking 1. Like, it makes a huge difference. So just by increasing, so like, yeah, if you have all 3 slots of magic defense and you're fighting enemies that only do magic damage, then all of a sudden you can just you're invincible. They can't do anything to you. In the next room, after you've defeated the enemies, we need to choose which skull to go through. We can't go through the right one, we can only go through the left, which is kind of fun because when we were in Tyrano Lair, it was the opposite. Like, we had access to the right one, but then we had to open the left one, and now we can go in the left one, but then we have to gain access to the right one. It's just kind of fun. Like, it's the opposite of what it was last time. Now, upstairs, if you go to the left entrance, you'll find a chest containing the Wrath/Frenzy Band. Super good accessory that gives you an 80% counter rate. Really, really good. Now, there, I did actually was able to, like, sneak past this combat, so you can just ignore it if you want to. However, I do think it's worth doing because you want to charm that Mega Elixir off of the Fossil Ape. Super valuable. Now, otherwise, these Lizardactyls, I think, are super annoying. I'd rather just kill them. So now that I've charmed a successful item, I think I would overall just recommend you just use some full screen clear with Magus or something like that, and just destroy all these guys. But yeah, overall, like, the 2 enemies that you really want to fight, that you want to charm stuff off of, is going to be Fossil Apes and Isotonics, otherwise known as Leapers, which are these guys right here. So these 2 enemies have the most valuable items. So the Fossil Apes have the Mega Elixirs and Mega Elixirs, and the Leapers have just regular Elixirs. So they're both just super good. It's the most valuable items here. So if you're going to be charming, this is the kind of combat where you really want to do it. The other combats is kind of like, you might as well just go ahead and kill the whole screen, you know? Now, of course, in this room, alternatively, you can just step on the buttons to make some pits that the enemies fall in so that you can just make them go away entirely so you don't have to deal with them. So that's one way you can deal with that. Now, in the next room, there is actually some rubble. Now, defaultly, these guys will cast Omnilock, which prevent you from using your techs or your items. However, you can actually counteract this a little bit by wearing status protection gear, and all my guys actually have helmets on right now that provide status immunity. However, even though I have status immunity so they can't Omnilock me, so I should technically be able to use my techs and items, I can't actually select it here. I was trying to show that I could charm it, but it doesn't work, which I don't understand why. So when I look online, these guys can be charmed for mid-ethers, which is actually what they drop when you defeat them anyway, so you'd just be charming that off earlier. So there's no reason to be doing it. I just wanted to see if I could, I suppose. I don't actually know why it's not working. These characters definitely do... Yeah, like you can see, Ayla has a red border around her. That's because she's hasted. And so, sure enough, she is wearing the Angel's Tiara, is the only reason that would be. So, she should be fine. I don't understand why. I guess it's possible she's wearing the haste helm in this recording, but I don't think so. I think when I completed Fiona's side quest, I guarantee that they just always were wearing the appropriate helmet. Now, in this next room, what you want to do is go ahead and interact with the egg, and then it will fall down into the cell from before. At this point, you can actually go over to the left and grab a capsule/tab that's here on the floor, but also you can open the skull if you want to gain a shortcut back to the rest of the dungeon. We are at the very end, though, so if you wanted to leave for some reason to go get more items or whatever, you could do that because we're about to have a boss battle. So instead, go over to the far right. And again, I just think this is interesting that we're going backwards through the entire dungeon. This is like literally the first room we went to when we did Tyrano Lair in the first place. So you can find a sparkly here, and what you want to do is go ahead and use a shelter, figure out what team composition you want, and then head into the next room. So in the last video, I completed Genodome, which is Robo's side quest, and I got 2 arms for him, the Teraton arm and the Crisis arm. Now, the Crisis arm is funky. What it does is it gives him damage based upon the last digit of his current HP. So you can actually change that by guaranteeing, you can guarantee that he has a high number to increase his damage by giving him a earring, because what this will do is it'll temporarily increase his max HP. So if you make sure he's full health all the time, then he always does the max amount of damage possible, which is super great. So that's one way you can kind of cheat your status and make that work for you, which is great. Now, as far as your other characters, I'd recommend you you want to have either high fire resistance or high magic defense, and that will help you survive this boss battle. So red plates or red vests, ideally, one of those guys. Otherwise, you can wear like, the Moonbeam armor or the Zodiac cape, for example, that we got earlier in this dungeon, things like that. You can also wear accessories that do that as well, such as Flea's Bustier in particular. Now, as far as the Crisis arm goes, by the way, the 2 skills that benefit from it is going to be the Rocket Punch and the Rapid Fire Fist, otherwise known as Uzi Punch. So those 2 abilities benefit from that, but the 2 abilities that don't is Robo Tackle and like everything, all the elemental stuff. So Proximity Bomb, Electrocute, those don't benefit from the Crisis arm. They're not affected by that. So what you do is if your HP is a high number, so if it ends in a 9 or an 8 or 7, whatever, then you use Rapid Fire Punch. If it ends in a low number, then you use Robo Tackle. It's basically what that all boils down to. So I have a list of the best abilities to use. The ones I marked in white are the ones you should really pay attention to. So as far as Robo by himself, just Rapid Fire Fist is what you should use. If you're going to be using dual techs, the ones that are affected, they have the highest multipliers that are affected the most, is Bubble Snap / Bubble Breath for him and Frog, and then Beast Toss between him and Ayla are the 2 really good abilities that are affected by the Crisis arm. And then meanwhile, other abilities are not affected by it at all, so it's actually kind of to your benefit. So kind of what you do is, as his HP pool moves around, you can either heal him to guarantee he's doing crazy damage again, or you can just alternate abilities temporarily while his HP is not in a happy number. Alright, so in the next room we have the next boss, which is Rust Tyrano. Honestly, very similar to the previous fight, it just primarily the difference is that he does more damage and he has significantly more health, so that's kind of the biggest difference. So what you want to do is, first of all, I would highly recommend that you charm him with Ayla as soon as possible. So go ahead and do that. And the other thing I would recommend is wearing the Wrath Band that we got in this dungeon. Throw that on one of your characters and you can do some pretty good counter damage because the boss roars all the time, and each one of those roars can activate your counterattack as well. Now, as far as surviving his nasty flame attack, all you really needed to do is just wear some fire absorption gear or wear some magic resistance. Another potential option is you can either have Magus cast barrier on your characters, or you can use a barrier sphere if you charmed a bunch of those earlier in the game. And that would be a good way to survive that as well. It doesn't honestly do that much damage, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Like, just one well-timed, a star heal or a heal beam with Robo can take care of that really easily, so I wouldn't worry about it. But yeah, if you wear the Crisis arm, what this will do is it'll increase his damage a lot as long as he's not taking damage. This boss is actually a perfect example of when you want to use the Crisis arm, because he doesn't attack very often, and so as a result you have a lot of time where Robo is guaranteed to have a number for his HP that ends in 9. So as a result, he does the most damage possible. So he'll hit really, really hard. It's just super, super good. So just what you want to keep doing is just keep using Rapid Fire Fist with Robo, and you'll just destroy this guy super hard. Then meanwhile, whatever you have for your other two characters, just want to use somebody who can use a good dual tech. So for example, I'm using Inferno, which is based off of Ayla's magic stat. So the two things that made this battle crazy is the fact that I have given a lot of magic to Ayla, and the fact that I have the gold earring on Robo to temporarily get his numbers up to 99, or yeah, just to max out his HP temporarily so that he can use the Crisis Arm. If the boss does get his flame attack off, it's not really that big a deal. You just have to use some full party heals, and then just watch out for his chomp, because that is kind of nasty. You should have more than enough HP to survive it, at least at this point. As long as you're healing consistently, it's not that big a deal. It does lifesteal, and it does heal for a good chunk, but by this point, you're probably doing a significant chunk of damage just in general. But this boss is very similar to the previous Tyrano fight, so I didn't actually show like that fight in depth at all, because I just totally murdered him and he didn't even have a chance to hit me, but you get the idea. It's pretty straightforward. Now for this next section, the characters I think are the most interesting is going to be Marle, Chrono, and Magus. The reason for this is because Chrono never speaks, it gives Magus an opportunity to speak for this next section, which he never is able to before. I also kind of find it funny to have Magus interacting with the people back in the castle back in 600 AD, because he was like the bad guy that they didn't like, so I find it kind of fun to have him interacting for this quest. Alright, so the summary of all that is we're leaving the Rainbow Shell here in Guardia Castle in 600 AD. One of the things I think is kind of funny is you can talk to one of the guards down here below that says that we are the ones who... He's like, thank you so much for defeating Magus, but I find it funny because I'm speaking to him as Magus, like, douchebag. So anyway, the king and queen agreed to hang on to the Rainbow Shell and keep it as a family heirloom, which is kind of funny because, Marle is one of the royal family, so by doing so, she's guaranteeing that it's her possession in the future. So anyways, now you want to head back to 1000 AD and make sure you have Marle in your party, otherwise they'll kick you out of the castle. And when you come in, what you'll find is that the king is actually on trial, and they say that he tried to sell off a royal heirloom, so something is going on here. So the Chancellor has ordered that the castle all be locked away, so you can't go anywhere for the most part, but you can wander around and speak with the various guards and interact with the cook down in the kitchens, for example, just to hear a little bit of what's going on. It just seems like the guards are being overly controlling and oppressive and stuff like that, so it's just a good time all around. So next you want to head up the stairs this time to reach the courtroom, which is where we actually were before. Now remember that we couldn't actually go in there before because, it's been sealed off this entire time, but now we can finally access it at long last and go there ourselves. Now along the way though, there is a chest that you can potentially inspect. You'll see that it is locked. Just note that because we will be interacting with that later on in this video. Now when you approach the guards, as long as you have Marle in your party, then she will yell at them and make them move so we can enter the courtroom. So as I've expressed before earlier in the walkthrough, it seems like the Chancellor is just a turd in every time period, am I right? So anyways, the idea is what's going on is that apparently that as the years have passed, it's been 400 years now, and the royal family doesn't remember anything about the Rainbow Shell, and so as a result, it is still in storage, but they don't know where it is. So here the Chancellor is accusing the king of finding it and selling it off as opposed to sharing it with everybody because it's a pretty thing, I guess, whatever, and it belongs to the kingdom, but he's trying to sell it for personal gain or some such. And there's all these kind of shady pieces of evidence that are trying to frame the king, and it's pretty obvious that it's all kind of shady and underhanded and stuff like that, and totally not true. I also just don't understand what he's even accusing the king of, or he's like, oh, you're being greedy. What's the king gonna do? Have a medieval hot tub? I don't understand what he's even gonna do with that. He's the king, and he's got a lot of responsibilities, and he's definitely cares about the kingdom. We've already seen that through some of the dialogue and stuff anyway, so I don't know. It's just, the whole thing's just kind of silly to me. I remember when I was young, I thought this was all very strange, but now that I'm older, I can recognize that some of these themes are definitely based on Japanese culture. Like, it's very much obvious that this is like just kind of almost a commentary on Japanese, justice system in general. Like something like I'm in America, and growing up, I thought this was odd because there's like a phrase that we use all the time here that says you're innocent until proven guilty. But that kind of mentality isn't necessarily true in other countries, and in Japan, it's kind of like I don't exactly know like much about it, but one thing I do know is like, for example, if you get arrested, like here in America, if you get arrested, they can't hold you unless they have some severe proof. Like if they're like just arrest you from suspicion of something, like you have to be released either immediately or within a day. They can't hold you for long at all. So meanwhile in Japan, that's not the case. If you're arrested, if they suspect you of something and they're like being like, I don't trust you, you're a bad guy kind of thing, and they throw you in jail, you are in jail for a month, if not like 3 months or longer, or even years sometimes. Like it's bad. So like being accused of something is like not only a serious allegation, but it's like it's over. Like I don't know how to explain it. It's a bad deal. So being taken to court like that is not something like a good example of this is the Phoenix Wright series, kind of, because that's of course an allegory. It's ridiculously over the top and it's like blown way out of proportion and everything. But point is that is based off of the Japanese justice system, and it's just like made a little bit more extreme. So that's the thing, and you see this like in like the anime Psycho Pass, for example. That's a much more mature category, but that anime, for example, is all about like society has already decided what kind of person you are already, and you are accused before you've even done anything. The system has already determined whether you're guilty or not. And that is very much a Japanese culture kind of thing. So like the very fact that this is even in this game is like it's a little bit over the top, and you wouldn't see this in an American game, is I guess part of what I'm trying to point out. And this is kind of true in any of the arts in general, whether this be music or video games or movies or whatever, where people will comment on, it's politics or, wars that happened or whatever, and like that will come up in various themes in video games, etc. So it's not like it's unusual that this is happening at all. It's just I'm commenting that this is quite specifically is referencing stuff that happens in Japan. It's blown out of proportion, and it's like, but it's symbolic or whatever, kind of, in a way. And that's what this is all happening. So I didn't realize that when I was younger, but now that I'm older, it's very obvious that that's what's going on because I know a little bit more about it. So if you have Magus in your party, he has a lot of, I like his comments with people because he's always just like so angsty, and he's like rude and stuff all the time. And I find his like question up ahead really funny. You can have different characters in here and they all react to finding the letter that's left behind by Queen Lean, but then Magus's reaction just makes me laugh. He's like, I found a letter. Shall I burn it? Like, what kind of reaction is that? Like, what kind of question? Who would say that? Like, I don't even know. Like, everybody be curious or something, but like, he's just so offended, so easily like this isn't worth my time or something. I don't even know what he's getting at. Well, how could you even come to that conclusion? It just feels so over the top to me. Like, I feel like anybody else, a normal reaction would either be to read it because you're curious or to not read it for like the sake of somebody else's privacy, but it'll be like, I found somebody's diary. Let's burn it. Like, it just seems so cruel, or like, I don't know, maybe that's the entire point, but just like, I don't know, maybe it just didn't translate well, but it just makes me laugh. This part always makes me think it was a little bit odd too. Like, this thing was super heavy, so I just assumed it was pretty durable, but I just find it ironic that Marle can just walk up to it and just be like, there she goes, got a rainbow shard, Seems a little bit easier than it should be, So our goal is to bring this chunk back to the courtroom before the king is found guilty, and we just have a limited amount of time to do so. And of course, in real game time, you actually have more than enough time because nothing's going to proceed until you get there. One thing I think is kind of weird about this too is like, even if you did have a chunk of the rainbow shell, like, what does that even prove? Like, all it proves is that the rainbow shell exists. Like, wouldn't proving that this rainbow shell doesn't exist, like, be more in the king's favor than proving it does exist? So, like, so what if we have a shard? Then he could just be like, yeah, see, you have a chunk of it, and like, it's not there, or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like having a chunk of it actually proves anything other than, I don't know, the whole thing is like based off elements of truth, but it's been twisted and stuff. That's what lies are in a lot of ways. Like, the most believable lies are when they have elements of truth in them. I don't know, the whole thing feels kind of strange to me, but similarly, it's kind of the similar deal with the Japanese justice system that I was just talking about. Like, all these examples that I've talked about are like these extreme examples. We have this game, we have Phoenix Wright series, we have Psychopaths, all of which are these like forms of media that are like taking this concept and blowing it way out of proportion and making it super extreme. So it's not really a good representation of how it really is in reality. So just take everything that I was talking about with a grain of salt. But that all being said, if there's somebody who's watching this who either is Japanese or lives in Japan, and you have something to share with the group about that to better inform us of what it's actually like, or like what are your thoughts about, somebody who actually sees all that stuff in reality or whatever, you know what I mean? Like just sees that justice system in reality. What are your observations about this side quest? I think your perspective would be really interesting to hear and to like share with the group, just to educate us properly and stuff, so we're not just getting all our information from like secondhand like media and video games, But yeah, if there's somebody out there who wouldn't mind doing that, I would very much appreciate that, and I think the rest of my viewers would appreciate that as well. It'd be cool to have like a nice educational discussion going back and forth in the comments. I like stuff like that. It's always fun. Alright, so we're about to face a boss, so what you want to wear is just a whole bunch of things that will increase your physical defense, because this boss just has a whole bunch of physical attacks, and the other thing he has is he can apply a bunch of pretty nasty chaos debuffs on us, which is confusion. So if you want to wear something that will resist that, so like Shala's Amulet as an accessory, you can wear the Nova Armor as a chest piece that'll block that, and otherwise there's various helmets that'll do that. So like the Sight Cap, otherwise known as the Clarity Cap, is good for that. Otherwise the Vigilant Helm is really good, or otherwise called the Vigil Helm. That's a really good one as well. I also have Angel's Tiara, and that'll also do that as well. So here I just picked out 3 characters for this, and I have Robo, he still has the Crisis Arm, and I have that, again, that accessory. Now this is probably more typical, like, combat, where you have to keep healing him in order to make sure that his damage is really high. You can just alternatively, like I was saying earlier in the video, you can just switch between which abilities he's using, because some of them scale with the Crisis Arm and some of them don't. So you just use the really good abilities when his health is high, and then you use the other abilities, you alternate back and forth, use those ones when his HP ends in a number that's low. Kind of just means that he's going from doing really good damage to doing just okay damage, and it's whatever, This part always made me a little sad. Like, I have a grandpa who actually would make stained glass windows as a hobby, just on the side. He's very artistic. He's a really, really good painter, for example. We have a bunch of his paintings in our house, but the stained glass windows, I used to watch him make them. He cut little pieces of glass and then like set them in metal and stuff, and it was just a really time-consuming process. Each piece took him a long time, and I never understood how he did it. He didn't have like a picture or anything. He's all just like envisioning it in his head, and so he'd have all these little pieces of glass like in a pile next to him, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna put them together. I'm like, what are you even doing? But anyway, so I don't understand how he had like an image in his head of what he was even gonna do with it. Maybe it was all custom. He just had individual pieces and he was going to put them all together later or something. I don't know. I don't understand. Whether it has a bunch of pieces he can work with, just uses that as a base. But anyways, it was a very time-consuming process just getting the pieces set up in the first place. So like when I think of this, of just like she ruined that thing, it's just like, oh, so cringeworthy because it's just so much work. That's true with any art though too. So many hours, spent so much time, so much effort. That's what I always think of when I see this scene. It's just my grandpa just like fiddling with little pieces of glass for hours and hours and hours, Like, oh no. So it looks like apparently the Chancellor was actually one of Yakra's descendants all along, which makes a lot of sense. That's why he was accusing Chrono back in the trial and stuff like that, is because he was one of the bad guys all along. I find it kind of corny that apparently, the same thing that happened to the Chancellor in 600 AD happened to this one in 1000 AD as well. It's just kind of corny. Like, I'm not necessarily opposed to the fact that Yakra's around again, but I am kind of opposed to the fact that it was a Chancellor again. Like, oh, come on. We've already seen this before. It makes sense, though, I guess. And now, the one thing I would highly recommend you do is bring Ayla with you so you can charm the rare white plate off of this guy. Super valuable. Now, if your guys get hit with Miasma/Confuse, otherwise known as Blizzard Chaos, you want to go ahead and use a Panacea/Heal if you don't have any status protection. Now, in this particular case, I do actually have the Crisis Arm on Robo, so I'm going to do massive damage to this guy with that ability alone. Super, super good. Robo's able to just dish out some serious pain now, but another thing you can do too is that the Crisis Arm also scales with a couple different abilities. In particular, one of them is Beast Toss. Absolutely amazing ability, so if you use the Crisis Arm and if Robo's health ends in a 9, there's current HP, he can do some massive damage with this ability, which is an absolute boss killer. This is a great example of that. Now here with Marle, I'm using Ice 2. It probably would have been smarter overall if I had just used Haste on Robo instead. So as long as you have high physical defense, you can even use Guardian health for that too, but I think overall the status protection is overall more important. But the other thing that you want to do with this boss is just know that if you can kill him as soon as possible, the more damage you can do faster the better, because the longer this battle goes on, eventually the boss will start using Needle Spin, which is a really hard-hitting attack that hits somebody from anywhere from 100 damage to significantly more. It really depends greatly on how much stamina and / vigor and armor that you have. So you can take a big chunk of damage. It only does it to one target, and it has a pretty long cooldown. However, he will also use Needle Spin Barrage, which is his death counter. So if you kill him, he'll then hit everybody with that Needle Spin, which can potentially hit really, really hard. So you want to go ahead and, just make sure you're full health or pretty close to that before you finish him off. Otherwise, he could one-shot you there at the end. Now, I mentioned earlier in this video that there was an optional side questy thing you could do. There wasn't any, rewards for it or anything. It was actually just for lore purposes, but I covered it back in video 18 of this walkthrough, so if you want to see how to do that, you can refer to those videos. But there was, kind of a sad interaction between Marle and the king where they got a little even more estranged, and, they were just not on good terms. So this whole side quest is them making up and everything being happy again. And before we move on, just make note of the fact that there is a sparkly on the ground where Yakra was defeated. Now at this point, Melchoir will actually show up and claim that he can craft stuff with the rainbow shell. And he actually did mention this to us earlier in the game, but if you were paying attention, but he just kind of briefly mentioned it. Now one quick note about this is he can actually craft one additional item for you if you have the Sunstone in your possession, which is what we got for completing Luca's side quest. So if you have not completed Luca's side quest yet, I highly recommend that you go do that side quest first before you get the rewards from Melchoir. Otherwise you will miss out on some really good loot. Now if you go over to Pierre over in the guards room over there on the left, then he'll say that he doesn't know where the Chancellor is. So you want to go back upstairs and go all the way to the courtroom, and you'll see that there's that sparkly on the ground I was just mentioning a little bit ago. It was left behind by Yakra. You want to inspect it to find Yakra's key. Now with that, you want to go back down the stairs just like 2 times, and you'll see a locked chest there. You want to interact with it. This will open up to reveal the Chancellor. I do find this whole development a little bit corny because it's like a repeat of what happened in 600 AD, and I understand what they're doing is they're just like reusing assets so that they don't have more development time having to be spent on other things and such. But one thing I will say is I do find this game very impressive. I think this particular side quest was like a little bit over the top as far as too similar to the storyline that happened before. But most of the bosses and stuff that they've reused have actually been like different enough that I don't mind the fact that they're similar. I do find that a little bit frustrating just because I feel like it confuses players because they don't realize the mechanics are different. That's the part I find frustrating, I suppose. But in general, though, as far as the actual quests and where you're going and stuff like that, I feel like these endgame side quests, they did an amazing job for reusing assets and stuff. It's really well done. So I find it very impressive, and it doesn't bother me. I think they actually did a really good job. I think this is the model for how you should do it, you know? Now once you've saved the Chancellor, then the people's dialogue here in the castle changes slightly as well. But just so you know, this is one of the key events that modifies the credits at the end of the game, is whether or not you save the Chancellor. So there's a bunch of little details like that throughout the game that change specific scenes that happen in the credits. So this is one of the good things that you want to take care of. I do find this development a little bit ridiculous just because it's the exact same thing that happened before, or Just crazy that we, like, foiled Yakra's plans back 400 years ago, and then he does the exact, I don't know, like, somehow that Yakra, or, like, his child or something like that, heard about his ancestors doing that and stuff like that, and was like, I'm gonna do it too, but this time I'm gonna do it even more crazy. And then he not only pulls it off, but he almost executes the king this time, instead of just Chrono, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, yeah. It's just crazy. You know, the old Yakra was trying to overthrow the kingdom, and this one was doing the exact same thing, but he just did it all, like, behind the scenes, and he was just sowing discord everywhere he went. And so suddenly it makes sense why, like, Marle was so estranged with her father, and, like, why, which especially if you did some of the earlier side quests, you'd realize, like, so you'd see some of that too. But also, like, why he was trying to keep Chrono away and stuff like that too. It makes a lot more sense why that was happening. So the Chancellor and Pierre are now hard at work getting everything prepared for the Moonlight Parade, which is going to be what takes place during the credits of the game. So we'll see more about them later. So next I'm going to go all the way down to the basement because Melchoir, the Guru of Life, told us to meet him there because he's a master craftsman of not only Dreamstone, but other rare materials such as Sunstone and the Rainbow Shell. So Melchoir says that he can craft some items from the Rainbow Shell, but either a prismatic dress or 3 prismatic helms. We have to choose which one we want. Now, of those different options, I highly recommend you get the prismatic dress. It is way better. Now, in my particular case, I actually got several prismatic dresses in the Arena of Ages, so I already have them. So I'm going to get the prism helms instead. However, yes, for you, I would highly recommend, if you don't already have additional dresses, definitely get the dress. Super good. So the dress is best in slot for all of our girls. It's just really good, so at least one of your girls can be wearing really awesome defensive armor. That's great. Now, the helms, on the other hand, are just kind of okay. They're really good defense, but half the time, they're not really that much better compared to the Vigilant helms. You're going to use those for status protection half the time anyways, so it's kind of so-so. So next, he will then give you the Prismatic Spectacles. Now, he'll only give you these if you have the Sunstone in your possession by completing Luca's side quest earlier. So as long as you did Luca's side quest before this, then you will also get the Prism Specs, which are awesome. Super good item. And then lastly, he will give you the Rainbow, which is Chrono's second best sword in the game. Very, very good weapon. Now, the Rainbow doesn't have the 4x crit like the Suzaku does, however, it has a much higher crit chance, which means the overall damage is higher. Also, the base damage of the weapon is also higher in general. It's just better. One thing to note about that is your flat weapon damage for the guys anyways will determine the damage of a lot of your physical techs, so it will actually increase the damage of, like, Frenzy/Confuse, for example. So it's just really good. The Prismatic helms are pretty good. They have a lot of defense, but they also have magic defense, which is really nice, although we are quickly approaching the point where that doesn't really matter, because once we level up to the point where our magic defense hits 99, you can't go beyond that. So we're quickly approaching the point where that magic defense buff on the items don't matter. Meanwhile, items like the Prismatic Dress does scale with the endgame after our magic defense is capped out, because it provides the barrier buff, which will reduce incoming magic damage by 1/3. And that is, like, stacked on top of your magic defense. So this greatly reduces magic damage that you take. Now, I won several Prismatic Dresses in the Arena of Ages, which is crazy. That's super overpowered, the fact that I even have that. I also have Angel's Tiara, which in my opinion is best in slot for all of the girls as well. It gives haste and status immunity, which is a really good thing. You always want status immunity towards the end of the game. You need it for a lot of the endgame bosses. So we also got these sunglasses from Luca's side quest. However, the Prism Specs are just better. Sunglasses give you 20% more physical and magical damage. Prism Specs give you 50%, so increases your damage by quite a bit. Super good. I actually have multiple of them because, again, I won one in the Arena of Ages, so I have multiple of these too, that's actually kind of crazy too, because that is another item that scales at the very end of the game as well. But yeah, I would say this is overall the hardest, like, character-specific side quest towards the end of the game, but we get such good loot for this quest. Like, oh man, just so good. Not just the stuff here at the end, but also the stuff we got in the Sunken Tyrano Lair, like the Wrath/Frenzy Band, for example. Just a super good accessory. We got so much loot in the last little bit. Really, really good side quest. So worth it. But yeah, that's the end of this side quest and also this video. If you enjoyed this and found it helpful, be sure to throw a like on it, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content just like this. Stay awesome, have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.